Good afternoon, everyone. This is Gretchen Wall, the coordinator of the Produce Safety Alliance. I have 2 o'clock Eastern on my watch, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Produce Safety Educators Call number 36. And if you haven't joined our calls before, just going to go over a few brief instructions for how these calls generally function. So everyone on the call for right now is muted. We will likely have some time at the end of the presentations to stop and have some questions and discussion. If we can't get around to your question, feel free to submit those questions to us in the chat box, because we can go back and send those on to our speakers and presenters today. And if they have anything to add, I can always follow up with you via email. So feel free to use the chat box if you're not comfortable using the phone line, but we do hope to have some time for questions and discussions this afternoon. As you notice on your screen, if you're logged into the Zoom meeting, we are recording this meeting. We record all of our produce safety educators calls. And as soon as I have a chance to end the meeting in an hour or so and get the notes cleaned up, we'll post those on our website. You could actually go back and look at all of our previous calls, the recordings and the notes, all the way back to several years ago. So if you're new to our group, there's tons of information and tons of great presentations that we have up on our website, and this one will be posted there as well. So at this time, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Connie Fisk. She's our Northwest Extension Associate, and she helps organize this particular Produce Safety Educators call. And she's going to introduce our presenters for the afternoon. Connie?
Thank you, Gretchen. Today we're happy to have 2 PSA trainers who are known for their excellent delivery of Module 2. First, we're going to hear from Darrell McGuire. He's the Food Safety Specialist for Deep South Food Alliance based in Safford, Alabama. He's also the COO of the United Christian Community Association, the pastor at Bethel Hill Baptist Church, director of fine arts at A.L. Johnson High School, and a federal contractor and consultant with USDA. Next, we'll hear from Joan Olson. Joan and her partner Nick own and operate Prairie Drifter Farm in Litchfield, Minnesota, along with their children Abe and Freya. Prairie Drifter Farm is a 33-acre certified organic vegetable farm serving several communities in Minnesota. They grow food for over 200 CSA member families, as well as several local restaurants, co-ops, and food shelves. Joan and Nick are committed to producing great tasting, healthy produce using strong food safety practices because they want to give their customers the best food that they can produce and want their local food system to remain competitive and resilient. They're committed to educating their employees as well as their fellow farmers and making food safety practices accessible and approachable. So now we'll turn it over to Darrell.
I'd like to say good afternoon to everyone. I feel honored to call in and discuss how I teach Module 2. I realize that I'm talking to people that probably know more about the module than I do, but I do appreciate the opportunity to give my perspective on how I teach Module 2. So let's go ahead and jump right into Module 2 because of time. Module 2 is Worker Health, Hygiene, and Training. What I normally do with the first part of the module where it says worker health, hygiene, and training, I talk a little bit about Module 2, the subject. I kind of do the same thing in church. I talk about worker health. I'll talk about what that means. I also talk about hygiene, what that means, and then I talk about training. And with Module 2, I talk about how training is necessary, the time of trainings, and so forth. Worker health, people kind of understand that, and people kind of understand hygiene. But when you look at training, a lot of people have different perspectives on training, so I'll talk a little bit about training. Afterwards, I would go to learning objectives. Now, with learning objectives, I don't spend a lot of time describing these in the beginning. I notice a lot of people do, but I don't. But I read them slowly. And the reason I read them slowly is because when I'm reading them throughout the module, sometime I would come back and refer to a learning objective. That way, that keeps me in line with with making sure that I get the objectives over, but also if I spend a lot of time talking on the learning objectives, then that kills a lot of time throughout the module. I'll end up saying the same thing twice versus reading the learning objectives and then moving on. Now, what I also will do, when I get to the last part of each slide, I spend a lot of time on the last sentence or the last phrase, where it says identify record keeping tools for worker health and training. If you look at that, there's the training again, so I refer back to training in the first part, and then I would go and then I would bring up the fact that a lot of people do not like to keep records. Now, once I do that, I gauge the audience and I look at their response. If the audience is kind of with me on that, I'll talk about that a little bit more. And so anything in the module that I'm talking about, I often look at the audience response. Now, based on their response, tells me if I need to use more hand gestures or if I need to raise my voice a little bit or bring it down. I'm very big on voice presentation and pronouncing my words. Now, for instance, like I just got a little bit louder. That gets people attention. If I'm like this the entire time and I'm talking about housekeeping, people will go to sleep on me. And so I try to keep them from going to sleep by interacting not only with my voice and hand gestures, but every now and then, if it's somebody that I know in the room, I'll call their name. Next slide, please. Workers are a food safety concern because they. And so once I get to this slide right here, and sometimes I do it before I get to the slide, I will ask, what are some concerns in food safety? What are some major concerns? And a lot of people skip over workers. A lot of people would call the equipment, they would call animals, they'll call other things of that nature, but they forget about workers. But if somebody in the audience say workers, then I click it and go to the next slide. And then I'll look at them and point at them and I would say, you're exactly right. And that made people feel good about the module when they realize, hey, I picked a good or correct answer. The more I make people feel good about what I'm telling them, the more that they would write it down or go home and remember it. And I've had people to say, you know what, I'm going home and let my husband or let my wife know that that I knew more about food safety than I thought. And a lot of times when you do that, you keep people engaged. Now, right here, I would explain pathogens a little bit more because a lot of people have not heard of the word pathogens, but a lot of people have heard of viruses or things in poop, parasites, and things of that nature. But a lot of people have not heard the word pathogens. And so I let them know that pathogen is something that you already know, but you just not have called it pathogens. And so we talk about how humans can carry pathogens, they spread pathogens. And then I get down there and I ask the question, even though it's on the screen, I ask the questions, what's some type of way to reduce those risks of pathogens? And because they already see training, and I talked about training in the beginning and on the next slide, everybody mostly say training. Then I let everybody know you're exactly right. Now I've engaged more people into the conversation. What I try to do is I try to take what's on the screen and I do it just like if I'm public speaking anywhere else. I have to engage the people in it. Now, if the room is getting quiet, then I change my voice again. Or sometimes I even leave from behind the clicker and the podium and I walk down where the people are. You have to keep people engaged. With this much information, you have to keep them engaged. Next slide, please. Routes of contamination. Now, when I get right here, I'm very interactive right here. I go ahead and I name everything on the screen: feces, clothing, hands, footwear, tools and equipment, illness and injury. And then I talk about each one. Now, I spend a lot more time right here than I do on some. I spend a lot more time right here. And then I ask questions about it. For instance, if I get to clothing, I would ask, why is clothing such, why could clothing be a root of contamination? And then everybody always have all the different answers. Some say because animals, because you may pick up something somewhere. And then once everybody gets through answering, I let them know you all are right. Now I have the entire rooms. Now, when I get to hands, I let them know that your hand touches everything on your farm. And when I get there, a lot of people then are looking at me like, wow, what have I touched? I get the footwear, I get the tools and equipment, I get to illness and injury. And then, but now right here, I kind of skip over some slides, but I need this on their mind. So I would tell them, even though you are the owner or you are the supervisor and you need to get crops harvest or you need to get them into the ground, you cannot ignore illness and injury just to make a profit. Because I know at the end of the day, everybody wants to make profit, but you also want to be aware of illness and injury, because a lot of people will ignore illness and injury just to get product out and make a profit. Next slide, please. Importance of training workers. When I get right here, I would read all of this at one time. And the reason for that, because I don't like to get caught up in turning all this into phrases like fresh fruits and vegetables often receive no additional processing, such as cooking. If I stop right there and start talking, then my questions go from food safety to, well, do you cook this? Well, I do this on my farm. And before you know it, the conversation has left food safety, and now we're talking about kill steps. We're talking about marketing. Can you cook it this way? At what temperature? I have to keep the ball rolling on food safety, and then let those questions be answered after the module. If not, I will run out of time, and I don't have very much time to get done what I need done. So then I'll start skipping stuff. And then what it says, workers need to use food safety practices every day. Now I stop right there. And I know it says to reduce produce safety risk, but I stop it every day. And the reason for that is because I let them know that when you're training your workers, you have to remind your workers. The reason is important to train them is because you need them to think about food safety every day. Not come in Monday and wash your hands, and then Tuesday you say, I'm not going to do that, and then just move on. And now some people like to train once a year, but I let them know that we don't do it once a year, that we do some type of training once a month. And it does not have to be on the same thing. You know, it could be on hand washing. It could be on keeping pests out. It could be on several different things. But you want food safety on their mind all the time, because it only takes one time for somebody to mess up. Now, right here, I also talk about the fact that they want to make profit. You know, everybody wants to make profit. So you talk about the fact that you want to make profit, but if you do not practice good food safety, one mistake and traceability come back to you and your farm could be shut down. And then the room just look at me like, wow. I said, I did not say it will be shut down, because I don't know your problem. But one major problem could stop your entire operation. Next slide, please. Potential training challenges. Now, right here, I spend a little time right here also, and I try to make sure that I don't offend anyone right here, because when you talk about challenges, even though you got people in the room that listen to you about what they should do, challenges sometimes can make people upset. So what I do is I read everything on the screen, and then I ask them to tell me what they think some of the challenges are. And a lot of times when I do that, they would tell me everything that I'm about to say. Like, for instance, time for training. Now, that's a challenge because you don't want to be training on harvest. You know, so you try to train either before or after. But when you get to language and literacy level, a lot of time people don't want to talk about that. But if you let them introduce that into the conversation, then you can talk about the fact that if you go and you do a 20-page cover on washing hands, nobody's going to read 20 pages about washing hands. But if you take them into the restroom and say, all right, sing the birthday song twice, you know, use the paper towel to turn the faucet off, and demonstrate that to them like that, then people are more acceptable to that. Now, what I like to do right here is I would tell a story or talk about some challenges that we had ourselves. And once I do that, then people don't feel like I'm talking about them, then they're learning from my mistakes. And people love to learn from your mistakes. Even when you get down to variation in hygiene practices and expectations, you know, you got to be careful, in my opinion. And I know some of you on the call might use some of these same tactics, and some of you might have other tactics that work as well. But for me and the people that I'm talking to, this seemed to work for me. A lot of the people are already afraid of the new FSMA rule, but when I make them feel comfortable and allow them to tell me the challenges and we talk together, then they seem to get it a little bit more. Next. Communication. So everything that I just talked about is communication. You know, you got to be able to communicate with your workers, your bosses, and your workers, especially when you're talking about training them. You know, how to identify food safety risks. Communication is so important because, for instance, on this call today, we have a lot of educators and lead trainers. You guys have dissected this material and you know a lot more probably than I do about this material. But even though I'm talking with you, if I came out using a lot of big words and 15-letter words and you'd be like, oh God, I get it. But at the end of the day, you might have somebody in the audience that say, oh my God, here we go again, a lot more government talk. I don't want to hear that. So when I communicate to the audience and I'm trying to get them to understand, to talk to their workers, I want them to talk to their workers almost as a conversation piece in their training versus a teaching piece where it's making them feel small. I tell them, if you talk to me on how to identify food safety risks, the next time I'm at work, I'm gonna be looking for that. If you talk to me on who to tell if I see a problem to minimize or eliminate, now when I see this problem, then I want to come back and talk to you. But you got to think about it. If I go to an employee with an attitude, they may see something and ignore it. So communication is very important. Next slide, please. Everyone needs training. And I know you see that double S at the bottom. Everybody know what that means. So when I get to this right here, because it's required that you say everything on here, I read that entire thing, I cover my bases, then I come back and I tell them what that means. The biggest problem I see right here is that when I'm talking is that a lot of people kind of get away from this slide. It's like everybody needs training, but I'm the only somebody here. So then I turn it around and say, all right, it's your job to make sure that everybody gets training, from the boss, from the workers. If your wife come out there, your husband, visitors, everybody needs training, and it's your job. And if you do not train people, when something go wrong, it's your fault. When I say that, it's like, oh my God, I better get this, because my job could be in jeopardy. And the truth is, and so I tell the truth. It might sound tight, but I tell the truth, because at the end of the day, people don't want me to come in and broad brush and tell them just what I think and broad brush it to where they go back and they haven't learned anything. So I try to make it relatable to things that actually happen on their farm. Next slide, please. Visitors. So we just talked about that. And there that mark is at the bottom again. So I read this entire thing. Well, this one right here, I normally tell a little short story about how I visited a farm and we were getting the food safety ready. And I was over in Mississippi, Okolona, and I was telling the landowner there, I said, you need a barrier right here, a fence or something to keep people that driving up out of your field or your garden. And the guy's like, man, I don't see the sense in that. I was like, but you know, people drive up, first thing people want to do is just walk out into your greens. And he was like, I don't think that'll happen. And like 5 minutes later, a van pulls up and he said, man, this is our local pastor. The guy gets out the van and the first thing he does is go straight to the field and say, these are some nice greens. And so I tell that story, and a lot of time when I tell that story, people start laughing. And then I say, have anybody ever experienced a visitor when they drive up, they come to your field? And everybody say yes. Then I had a question that said, but I don't see the problem in that. I said, okay. What if the preacher that drove up stopped by the bar and had him a beer? And everybody laughed. Preachers don't do that. I would say, okay. Well, maybe he didn't go to the bar. Let's say the preacher ride horses. He just got off the horse and he shoed the horse and he working around in his field or whatever. And he came in and he did not wash his hand and he came straight to your greens. Now, everything he touched is now on your crop. And most of the time when I say that and show the direction of pathogens or how they could have got on their crop, then people be like, you know what, I see your point now. Next slide, please. On this slide right here, I didn't think she got it in, but she got it in. On this slide right here, I talked to the class or the participants about your pets and animals and why it's important to keep them. And I know right here it does not talk specifically about it, but in here it's going to talk about keeping your pets at home in one of the slides. And so right here, I let them know if you cannot train your pet to leave your facility and go somewhere behind a tree and stand in a line, you need to keep them out of the garden. If you can't train them to pick up their own poop, you need to keep them out of the garden. And so I put pictures in there that may be a little funny, but it gets the point across. If I stand in front of a group of people and I raise my voice a little bit right now because some of you guys might be asleep. I don't know, I can't see you. But what I do is I raise my voice a little bit and I put pictures in place to demonstrate the fact why it's important, but also to put a little humor in it. You know, because some of this material, if you just stand up there and read it like this, people are like, oh my God, we should sit down. But normally when I put a picture in, if they are going to sleep, they wake up at this point. Next slide, please. Training programs must include. I talk about the fact that must is in there, the word must, and so it must include, and then the mark at the bottom. So I read the entire thing, and a lot of the stuff on here now I have already went over, but I read the entire thing, and then I refer back to some things that maybe I said earlier to kind of reiterate what I said, and they seem to get the picture because I was kind of thorough earlier. Next slide, please. Training program must. I talk about the must again. Be appropriate for the job and conducted upon hiring. I read all of that, but I focus on hiring. The reason I focus on hiring because a lot of times people hire workers, put them to work the next day because they got to have somebody working right now. But if you stop in the beginning, I let them know if you stop in the beginning and you kind of talk about the fact that if you implement food safety in their mind in the beginning, when you hire someone, especially like Walmart does this, Walmart have you sit down in front of a screen and Walmart tells you all about their programs and what they expect. When you hit the floor, that is on your mind. And so I tell them to do food safety the same way. You want to put on their mind what you want them to be doing. And so as they get on your property, then they already got food safety on their mind. One of the mistakes we make, and so this is how I talk to the audience. I let them know one of the mistakes that we make. I say the word we. I don't say y'all or you guys or you all. I say we. The reason I say we is because if I separate myself from them, like I'm perfect, I got it all together, then they don't relate with me. But if I say we, I let them know that I can make mistakes also, that I'm not perfect. And once you do that, then people are with you. They feel like, okay, we're in this thing together, and they'll get it a lot better than if I said, something wrong with y'all. No, I let them know that we're all in this together, and we're all trying to make sure that we keep food safe. Next slide, please. Worker qualification: workers and supervisors must be qualified to conduct their jobs through education, training, experience. I talk about those three pieces, but then I fall back and let them know, if you got a worker that's got an attitude, they messy, and when I say messy, people kind of start laughing a little bit, and they don't laugh because they're laughing because I said it. They're laughing because they know some messy people on their farm. And so that kind of controversy for some people, I'm not afraid to say it. So I say it, they kind of laugh about it. And I said, but if you put somebody like that over food safety, it's not gonna work. You have to find somebody that can relate to the people and talk with them to help get that across. Now, if I say messy and the audience kind of half grin and they keep going, then I leave messy alone, because their demeanor told me I don't know a lot of messy people, even though they may know them, they don't want to talk about it. So I leave that, and then I go to make sure you have somebody that got a pleasant attitude. Next slide, please. Training workers to identify and reduce risk at harvest. So, and you see the mark at the bottom. So I read all of this, but this basically pertains to everything that I said before, but now is at harvest time. So and I know you guys already know this, but you'll be doing a lot of double talking. But at this point, I make sure that I reference what I said earlier, and that you need to do it at harvest time like you do it in the beginning of your process. Next slide, please. Resources provided to support food safety practices. So right here, we talk about what needs to be on the farm. Right here, I also talk about the fact that we have a demonstration farm here in Thomaston, Alabama, where we bring farmers out and show them food safety practices. And so I talk about that. I also talk about the low cost in there. There again, you talk about cost, you get people attention because they're in it to make profit. A lot of people are scared of food safety practices because they're saying, oh my God, I got to pay a lot of money to get this done. So I let them know our cost, what we done, and how we got it on the ground. And I let them know that you can do a hand washing station for $50, and people are like, oh, where can I find that at? And so I have some papers sometimes that I bring out, some stuff that I Google. You can use a bucket and this and that. And so once you let people know that sometimes it's a simple things, simple resources, then you have people that'll say, hey, can you visit my farm and help me with that? And so that's why I let them know that we can go as far as helping them visit. We can do a visit on their farm. Now, you may not do a visit, but you can recommend somebody to go out and do a visit. And so then, and having somebody to go out is called a resource. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide I think that I'm doing. Toilet and hand washing facilities. Yeah, I kept it almost 30 minutes. Good job, D. Thank you. So toilet and hand washing facilities provide a sufficient number of toilets. Everything right here, I read the entire thing again. But then after I read the entire thing and we talk about toilet and hand washing facilities, I have somebody to say, I've been farming for 20 years. I just go behind the tree. All right. So once they say that, and I've been looking for that phrase. And so once they say that, I ask them a question. I say, okay, when you go behind the tree, what do? I'll go back to work. I said, okay. So now that you're going back to work, the peach that you pulled off your tree, will you feed that to your daughter or your granddaughter? I make it personal at that point. Anytime I get a response to where they're saying that it doesn't matter, I make it personal and I bring it home for them. And so I have this one question I ask: if you came to my farm and you saw a little foo-foo, the dog, go and pee on some kale in the garden, do you want me to pull it up and give that to you? And people are like, oh no, I don't want that. Well, when you go use the restroom behind a tree and you go back out, it's the same thing. And I don't want it either. And so you gotta let people know that what you're producing can make somebody sick. And if you want to give it to your daughter or your granddaughter, then you shouldn't give it to anybody else either. I make it personal. And once I make it personal, that's when people start to think, I need to do something different. And so I think 18 is my last one. And so at that point, now I'm going to turn it back over. But if you want me to do 19, go to 19, I'll do it, or I can turn it over at this point.
Well, thanks, Darrell. I think we'll go ahead and pause because we're going to transition into another speaker. So today's call is really for you as trainers to incorporate some of these different techniques that other trainers are using. And I thought Darrell did a great job highlighting some of the things that tactics and tips and tricks that he uses when he's delivering this module. So before we move on to Joan, I wanted to see if anyone had any comments or any questions for Darrell regarding the first portion of this presentation for Module 2. So you can either unmute yourself. So if you're logged into the Zoom room, you can actually unmute your line. Or if you're called in without being logged in online, I believe you should be able to hit *6, and that should mute and unmute your line. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here and see if anybody has any questions or anything to add. I should also mention while we're waiting here for people to think of questions, Darrell may not be able to join us through the end of the meeting because everyone's got to work. So he's a busy guy, and if you have specific questions for Darrell, now's the time to ask him.
Also want to throw it out there, Darrell, that you are receiving some great compliments in the chat box if you want to have a look at it before you go.
Okay, I appreciate that. Also, I'm feel free to give anyone my email address. Right, and yeah, I appreciate that.
So
Kristen, she's gonna type it in for me. I appreciate her helping me as well. But yeah, but feel free to email me if you got some tips for me. Email me some tips, and however you want to do it. I just want to get the message across, and so I believe if we work together, that everything will be great.
Well, and while we were waiting here, there was one question that came in actually from Betsy, and that was, what is the strangest worker training questions you've ever received? And this is open to the group as well. Feel free to add into the chat box. But Darrell, do you have any moments that kind of stand out in your mind as, wow, that was a really interesting question?
Yeah, I had one guy that said that his dog keep the bird away. He's told me he's not going to take his dog out of his field. He's going to keep his dog in his field. And he said that if I have not made anybody sick in 20 years, why should I do it now? And so I sat there and I paused for a minute. A lot of times when they give me questions like that, the question is not really for the answer. The question is to prove that they don't have to do it. So I just pause. And as I pause, somebody else in the audience said, because it's the right thing to do. And so I just paused. And then I asked him, I said, sir, where are you selling your product? He said, I sell it and give it to the community. I said, are they complaining? He said, no. I said, sir, having a dog in your field is not practicing good food safety. I said, we already know that. I said, but at the end of the day, that's your product, and I cannot make you do anything. I can only tell you what I know. And after that was over, he said, well, I appreciate you not trying to make me do anything, and I think I'd do better. A lot of times people want to see what you're going to tell them. And so I thought that was not strange. I thought he wanted to fight, but he didn't want to fight. He just wanted to let me know that he was a man, so I let him be a man.
All right, that's a great tip. I also see somebody named Kay Cox has their hand raised, and you're unmuted. So if you have a question, go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, I was wondering, when you offer your trainings, do you find any difference between a full day training versus breaking it up into the individual modules and spreading it out? Or which do you offer usually?
We do 1 day training, but I recently been involved in 2 day training. We have one coming up in Georgia. I like the 2 day training, and I'm gonna tell you why. I like the training where you go and you can train, but you can actually go and put hands on. Once you do that, then you give somebody something to remember. This is a lot of material to try to do in 1 day. And so I think when you break it up, people not only get it, but they can put hands on it. I think sometimes doing it in 1 day, people only remember 2 modules, then they go home and try to read the rest, and then they call me the next 2 or 3 months, or Christian or someone, and trying to make sense of it. But I think if you break it up in 2 days and actually go out and let people put their hands on it, say, now this is what I mean by deterring pests. This is what I mean by the hand washing station. This is what I mean by your water. You know, you can't look at water and just tell the pH in it. You have to get it tested. And put 2 bottles up there and say, okay, now drink one. And they won't drink either one because they don't know which one is right, because you have to get it tested. I think when people put their hands on it, then you give them something to remember.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Darrell, for your presentation and your tips. And when I put together the notes, I'll make sure to include Darrell's email. And do you mind if I share your phone number as well, Darrell? Because I know we've got some folks that don't use email that join these calls occasionally. They might want to talk to you directly, not via email.
Yeah, that's fine. The phone number,
okay.
Text, it don't make any difference.
Great.
Call, you can't get me, call Christian. Should drive over. Let me come outside.
All right.
All right.
Great. Well, we'll make sure to include that in the notes. And for those of you who are following the chat box, there have been a couple resources that have been shared. Don shared some resources from North Carolina State University and also a University of Minnesota resource. So we'll include those in our notes as well. So thanks again, Darrell. And I think at this point, we're going to move through the rest of the presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Joan.
Yeah, thanks, Gretchen. So this is Joan.
Yeah.
Kind of gave me a nice intro, but I also just want to give you a little more background so you know where I'm coming from when I'm teaching this material. So we have a 33-acre farm. On our farm, it's my husband and I, and then also 2 full-time employees and 1 part-time employee who comes 1 day a week. And then we also have about 6 work shares, who are people who come for half a day a week in exchange for vegetables. And the reason I'm telling you this is because the way that we train on our farm is very dependent on our scale of employees and our connections to our employees. So our full-time employees actually live on our farm in little cabins, and they know us really well. They're really close to us. They hang out with our kids. And again, the reason I'm trying to tell you this is going in as a trainer, it'd be nice for you to have some sense of who it is that you're talking to. You know, do you have a room full of people who have 30, 40 employees that are working on their farm? Do you have people who have no employees and it's just them and their partner? Or do you have people who have 6 employees? Just having a sense of that is gonna dictate a little bit about how they take in this information and how meaningful it is to them and how you can relate to them. So I think that's, you know, again, I know a lot of you aren't farmers who are on this call right now, but it's just something for you to plug into to kind of know who your audience is and how they will bring this information into themselves. And I wanted to connect back to one thing that Darrell had talked about earlier, which is communication. And I'm saying that now. I usually talk about it earlier in the module, but it's something that's important to us when we train in our farm. So one thing we just started doing in our farm is actually having a day where we talk about communication styles with our employees. And that helps us understand how they learn best, how they take in information best. Are they hands-on learners? Do they need a lot of support? Do they want to do things in a group or individually? So just as a farmer doing training for our employees, we really want to know how it is that they most and best take in information, so that we can communicate really well with them. And are they introverts? Are they extroverts? All of those things are really helpful as a farmer going into a training to kind of understand how to approach it. So when looking at this slide, as a farmer, the things that I pull out that are really important to me are, one, that like you have to have healthy workers to have them do a nice job on your farm. And so they have to have these things accessible to them. And then if you have a really small farm that doesn't have a lot of resources, you might see this and say, oh, I need a break room. Well, that's not true. And that's something to emphasize here. You need a designated area, but not a specific building. I think that's good for farmers of different scales to hear and be okay about. And then one thing I do mention here is with drinking water, to not have glass containers into your fields or your pack sheds, because it also is a physical food safety risk. So that's worth mentioning here as well. Could you go on to the next slide? So I know this is a transition slide, and it's a way to kind of go from training to practices. And I would ask this question: do you remember what was required? And I look into the audience, I get glazed eyes, and like, she's asking me a question, I have no idea what was required. Oh, I'm like, I have no idea. And I think one way to maybe get around that is at the beginning of this module, say, as we're working our way through this module, take note of things that you are already doing on your farm, and take note of training requirements that you see that are already happening, to know that a lot of us are already doing this stuff, and a lot of this is really basic things, and we just maybe need to tweak it on our farms. So then when you get to this slide, instead of saying, do you remember what was required, which kind of is a scary question if you're like being targeted as a learner, instead maybe what are you already doing in your farm that you have now learned is required by the FSMA rule? And it might just be a way to reframe this question to really get them back engaged. Know that, they're probably doing a really nice job already, and just emphasizing that these things are important. We just want everyone to know them. Okay, next slide. So I don't spend a lot of time on this slide because it really is an overview slide. And if I get time, so I just kind of, do a quick go through this list and say, we're going to cover all these things in depth in the later part of this module. Next slide. So when must hands be washed? So I do actually read through this list. I think it's good to just say this, and especially that last one, any other time your hands may become contaminated. I like to tell my employees on our farm, try to think of the most picky person that you can think of in your life. And one of mine would be one of my aunts, and have them on your shoulder and have them follow you through your day. If they're satisfied about what you're doing by your practices, chances are you're doing a nice job. So that just another way to emphasize, yes, it's this list and any other time that's reasonable. And also in this slide, I like to talk about the fact that on our farm, we like to shift this idea of caring to others through our practices. And, we're farmers. We all really want to have great quality produce that tastes good, it's healthy. It's not just growing great food, it's also making sure that the people who are eating that food, that we're taking care of them in a deeper way. We know a lot of our customers. We have a CSA, we're deeply connected to them. We're selling food right to our neighbors and people that watch our kids. So I think when you can just like get that into your minds, all these practices that we're doing are really helping you care for your customers. I think it reframes it a little bit for folks. Okay, next. So with the proper hand washing technique, I actually do read through this whole slide. I think that's a good thing. But Darrell was talking about like getting out from behind the podium. I think this is a really good one to get out from behind the podium and walk into the audience, because you don't really need your mic at that point if you have to leave your mic for some reason. You can probably talk loud enough in your room. And I actually have people, do this with me. So go through these motions with me. I know it seems a little hokey and they're adults and might kind of think it's kind of funny, but I think going through that actual step, one, it wakes people up because it gets them moving a little bit. And then it gets them thinking about like, okay, are you hitting every surface? What are you missing? How does that look? Go through the insides of your fingers, on your fingertips. and really actually do the process. And one thing I like to emphasize here, and again, I don't know who all here is farmers and who has been on farms or, taken part in harvest, but oftentimes for us on our farm, we have rubber bands that we wear around our hands when we want to bunch crops. And so that's one thing I like to emphasize here is if you have something like rubber bands that you wear around your hand when you're going to harvest crops, you don't want to necessarily have those on your hand when you're washing your hands and getting soap up onto those rubber bands, then go and bunch of kale. And then also, like, that is one of the importances of keeping that wrist area clean, not just the tips of your fingers, not just your palms, but you're taking that rubber band and putting it over your entire hand and then having it live on your wrist. So you got to make sure that all those parts of your hands are being clean. Another thing I like to point out is most farmers are wearing a watch on their hands to keep note of time. So that watch is another place that can be a real haven for things. Another thing is washing, sleeves. So if you want to picture a farmer right now washing their hands, I'm guessing you might be picturing them with a short sleeve shirt and in the summertime. What I want to retrain your mind to think about is a farmer who is out in the middle of September in a rainstorm with a PVC rain gear, long jacket on. They need to roll up their sleeves. I need to roll up my sleeves in that situation. Don't think of kind of best case scenario. It's what, God, what's the worst case scenario here? And making sure that you're really taking care of your clothing as well and getting out of the way so you can actually really wash your full hand and not just your fingertips or your palms. I do emphasize the antibacterial hand sanitizer as well. I think that's just really important to note in case people are thinking that it's an equivalent. Okay, next. Proper use of toilets. Again, this is going to really vary with people depending on the cultures that they're working with at their farm. And all this stuff seems really obvious, but it may or may not be depending on where people are farming. So just really emphasizing the proper use. One thing that we like to note is peeing on the edges of fields. Fairly common, something you don't want to do. And as a farm manager, you don't want to model that behavior either. So just again, making sure everyone's got it on the same page, make it real obvious, even though it seems as if you shouldn't have to really teach this stuff. You really should. Next slide. Okay, so worker clothing. I was going to just share a story with you that I usually share when I get to this slide. Again, this seems like one of those things oh yeah, everyone knows how to use a bathroom. Everyone knows how to wash their hands. Everyone knows you should wear clean clothes. Well, that's not necessarily true, and it should really be taught and trained. So my husband and I were managing a farm in Minnesota, and we had an intern who admitted to us at the end of the season that she literally had not washed her pants the entire season. Well, she was at our farm for 5 months. So that was kind of shocking to me. I had no idea that somebody wouldn't wash their pants. I think there's a little bit of oh yeah, I have Carhartts and they're tough and they can stand up at the end of the season. And though that's great, you don't want to teach your employees to have that kind of an ethic or a practice. So clean clothes and then model that yourself as well. We do talk a lot about footwear cleanliness. We have animals on our farm, so we have goats, sometimes pigs, and then chickens. And so on our farm, we have separate footwear for chores and then for those that are worn in the pack shed. We have it pre-designated where you can walk when you have chore boots on and where you cannot walk when you have chore boots on. And then in addition to footwear, you also have to think about rain gear. So again, we kind of picture these things happening in best case scenario, but we have times when our crew has to go out right before harvest, do the animal chores in a downpour. And so we have separate clothing, rain gear that's just designated for animal chores in case of that happens. And they need to have rain gear to keep the rain off when they go. Gloves, it's just really important to emphasize that idea that you have to wash your hands before you put the gloves on. Gloves don't make up for not washing your hands. And then just making sure to change them if they become torn. Again, here the emphasis is they're not required. You don't have to do this, but if you do, do it right. The thing about removing your food safety equipment, that's another thing we really go over with our employees. So we wear harvest knives in our pockets or on our belt loops when we go to harvest, not for every crop, but for a lot of them. And so we teach our employees, and I really emphasize this in the training too, that those things need to be removed before you go and use the toilet, or before you go and take a break, or before you go and eat lunch. And we have a place where our employees can put those things. Okay, next. Worker illness is another really big one. And this is one where I like to emphasize in this slide that as the manager, as the farmer owner, you really have to be doing what you're teaching your employees to do. And I think this kind of goes back to what I was talking about with communication and setting up really clear and comfortable communication between you and your employees. Yeah, your employees had to be comfortable to come up to you and say, hey, I'm sick, I can't work. And then without being shamed for that, or showing signs on your end of like, oh, I can't believe you got sick, we're so busy right now. Really have to make sure that workers know, like, it's okay if you get sick, it happens, I've been sick. And a story I like to share here is, I think it was like 4 years ago now, it was our very first week of harvest, and I had major diarrhea for a whole week, and I couldn't handle any fresh produce. And it was the week that we trained our employees how to harvest, and I'm typically on the lead on that. And it was so hard to stay out of the pack shed and stay out of the fields and not do that harvest. But we actually had to sit down with our employees and be like, hey, I'm sick, this is what's happening. I don't want to work when I'm sick, and then show them that it's okay to do that. I have to model them too. This happens, and it's, we're going to be okay. It might be kind of a crummy week, but we're going to be okay. It's not going to break our farm. It would certainly break our farm if I got sick and then passed on something to our customers. That's not cool. So again, I just really emphasize in this slide, like, you got to really model it for your employees and show them empathy if something would happen to them. And really educating them about those symptoms so they know what they are. One thing, I learned actually from our last presentation that we did here in Minnesota is just that stat about hepatitis A, that it can be transmitted, the virus can be transmitted or shed 2 to 6 weeks before you even show symptoms. That is huge to me. And that, again, goes back to the idea that this isn't just, you don't just do this stuff when something comes up. You should do this stuff always, because it could be sitting there in the background and you don't even know. So I think sharing that with the folks in the room so that they can then share that with their employees is a really good tool. Okay, next. Kind of injury and illness really go hand in hand for me with some of the similar things I just talked about in the last slide. One, you have to make sure that the folks in the room know they have to provide the right materials if people would get hurt, and then have a process for, if somebody gets hurt, what happens, and everybody needs to know what needs to happen at that point. So again, a story that I tell when I see this, when I come up with this slide, is on our farm, I say at the beginning of the season to every employee, every work share on our farm, there's a really good chance at some point during the season, you're going to cut yourself on a knife. We do our best to teach them how to carry them safely, how to harvest safely, how to store safely. But that being said, it's really easy to slip and cut your hands with a knife. If that happens, don't sweat it. We've all done it. It's probably going to happen. But here's what you need to do if that happens. You need to stop harvesting. You need to check and make sure that nothing's been contaminated. If it has, it needs to either get dumped, if it's produce, or clean and sanitized, if it's a tool or equipment, and then go back, clean it up, get a Band-Aid on. You got to wear a glove. And again, just when people come back out to the field, once they've gone in after getting cut, I like to emphasize, are you okay? Is there anything else you need? No shame. This has happened to me before. And if I cut myself, another story I like to share here is, I totally let all of our employees know. It's like, dang, cut myself. I'm going to go into the pack shed. I got to get a Band-Aid in the glove. I'll be back out. Just again, so they get this idea that you really have to set up this comfort with your employees if you want them to follow some of these practices that you're asking them to do. Another story I like to tell here is, when I was in college, I did a sailing program, and we sailed for 6 weeks in the Atlantic. And on that ship, all the students on the ship took part in cooking in the kitchen. And it's very common on the ship to like rope burn and things like that, because of you're handling a lot of ropes and a lot of fast lines going through. Well, this guy had rope burn, so he had Band-Aids on his hand. He started with 4, and he was in charge of making bread that day. Well, by the time he had put the bread into the oven, he no longer had any Band-Aids on his hand. So that's my bread and the Band-Aid story. Like, nobody wants Band-Aids in their salad mix. Nobody wants Band-Aids in their carrots. Make sure to put a glove on. So it's just a story that you are very welcome to share if you'd like to, just to kind of reemphasize why this is so important that we need to cover up our wounds, our Band-Aids with gloves. Okay, next. Monitoring, I think just the thing to share is, again, it's not enough to say you're going to do it. You actually have to make sure it happens. and that involves monitoring. So we'll talk about record keeping later, but a story that Annalisa from Minnesota had shared with us that I now share when I present this slide is there's an example of a really big farm, and they, in August, they noticed that they had no water in their hand washing stations. For how long? Who knows? But it just reemphasizes that just because you say you're doing something doesn't mean it's happening unless you're checking it. So making sure that people are following their food safety practices, like Darrell mentioned before, it's not just like a one and done training at the beginning of the season. You know, follow up on things, especially when things happen or things go wrong that you weren't expecting. That's a great time to follow up and just retrain. And again, no shame, retrain. Just like, hey, this happened, no big deal. Let's see how we can make this better together. Again, it's that teamwork thing of like, we're all in this together, and it needs all of us to make sure this gets carried out well on our farm. Okay, next slide. So corrective actions, a little bit going back to what I just said, but you know, if things aren't happening right, they've got to get corrected for the short term and the long term. I'll share an example with you. Actually, this happened at our farm last year. So one of our employees, and I do share this story when I get to this slide, and this is actually one of those stories, again, where I'll come out into the audience and know at this time people are tired and you want them still to just be on. So I'll come out in the audience and talk about last year, our employee went out to prune a diseased tomato out in the field, and she had a pruners with her. And we had just sharpened these pruners literally 3 days before. Well, she went to go prune the tomato, but she had put the pruners in her pocket, upside down and open. So when she knelt down to go check the tomato, she knelt down and put her forearm right onto the sharp blade of the pruners and had a big cut in her forearm. I was out in the field harvesting melons at the time, didn't know what was happening. I saw people all gathered up by our pack shed. There was like 4 or 5 people there. It looked like they were just chit-chatting. I was out in the field thinking, what are they doing? I'm out here harvesting melons on my own. Well, again, it turned out she had this deep gash, and we had to kind of stop everything. The other crew members that were there knew what to do because we talked about food safety. We talked about what happens if somebody gets hurt, what do we need to do? So immediately things got set aside to get cleaned and sanitized in terms of like the golf cart and the pruners that she had touched. My husband had to stop work. He had to drive her into the ER. She had to get stitches. We had to go through that process of work comp and reporting to our insurance agent. And then like after that, you know, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, we don't teach our employees to put their pruners upside down and open in their pockets. Like that's the corrective action that needs to happen here. We need to retrain. And we definitely got together as a crew and talked about the situation afterwards and said, like, how could we do this better? What did this look like? How did it go when the injury happened? Did we get everything taken care of? But as I was reflecting on it even deeper after the event, I realized that for several weeks, there was one pruner on our farm that had a really hard time opening and closing. And so I think people are kind of getting used to not closing their pruners all the way and locking them because of this one particular one that didn't close very well. The other thing is we don't have holsters for pruners on our farm. So when people aren't using them and they're not in their hands, they're typically in their pockets. Now, again, we didn't teach our employee to have an open upside down pruners in their pockets. However, we kind of set up some situations in our farm that encourage that. So we really had to think hard about our farm. So here's this corrective action idea. Sometimes it's not the cause you originally thought it was. If you dig a little deeper, it might actually come right back to you as the manager on your farm. So, you know, yes, it was an employee mistake, but it was also a mistake on our part of like, we can do this better. We can set people more up for success better on our farm. And again, it's just like really thinking deeply and moving together as a team forward to really make your food safety practices strong and make sure you have a safe place to work as well. Okay, next. And then record keeping. I'm a big record keeper, and I do want to kind of go back to this idea that not everybody in the room that I'm talking to may be a person who really likes to keep records. I will classify myself as type A, so this like spreadsheets really work well for me, but not necessarily for everybody in the room. But I think this is a point in saying that, you know, records aren't just keeping records for record's sake. it's a really nice idea to have them, because if you have a lot of employees, or even if you just have a couple, you might not forget, what have I trained this person in on? And, we got to the end of 1 year, 2 years ago, and one of our employees didn't know how to turn the cooler off. And I couldn't believe I had missed that. But if you don't really write down what it is that you want your employees to learn, then you can't really guarantee that you're actually making that happen for everybody either. People come in mid-season, people leave, forget stuff. So having records of what you're doing is a really good idea. And these records don't necessarily have to be onerous to the manager or the owner either. In some cases, I know of farms who have the employees themselves keep track of their training. So they have a training checklist, and as the employees get trained, they check it off, so that it's more kind of the employee's seat, or at least in tandem with the employee, to say, like, yeah, you've been trained. Do you feel like you've been trained well enough? Is there anything we need to go over? Have you been trained and then you've forgotten or didn't feel confident? It's just a way to, again, spread some of that management out, so that, because as a farm owner or a manager, there's a lot of responsibilities on your plates. Like on our farm, I'm doing HR, I'm doing website design, I'm doing marketing, I'm doing training. We're really doing everything in our farms. And anything you can do to encourage people who are listening to this training, think about how they can spread some of that out and not put it all into them, I think is a benefit. Next. So again, I think it's just good to stress to people, hey, you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's a lot of great materials already out there. Take advantage of them, and then talk to people, professionals in the field, if you need to get some templates and you need help finding them or modifying them for your farm. And next. Same thing here. Again, these are somewhat redundant slides, but I think it does help for people who have never thought about seeing a log before to see it up here on the screen and have the ability to ask questions about it if they need. And next. And then finally, the summary. I do usually actually read over these at the end. And what I really like to focus on is that we are farmers. We're caring for the land, but we're also caring for our customers. Really good worker training, and caring for our employees as well. So really good worker training is part of that. And for the most part, this really isn't onerous stuff. The time that you spend on training, you totally save on money later. Because if you train well at the beginning, you have people that, again, can take on those tasks that you need to spread out the management and make things more doable on your farm. I did want to stop here and say, so in Minnesota, usually we've been doing the glow germ exercise within this module, and there is an opportunity to do it after that slide where you actually go through the 4 steps of washing your hands. We've tended to leave it at the end of this module just to make sure we have time for everything. And so when I do the glow germ exercise, one thing I've heard some people do this and then some people not give this background about glow germ. I think it's important when you talk about glow germ to actually tell what the glow germ is supposed to be doing. So glow germ is supposed to be stimulated germs on your hands, and then the effort that it takes to remove the glow germ is supposed to also stimulate the effort that it actually takes to remove real bacteria. And I think that's an important note to make when you're using that glow germ, so people know what it is. Also, just in practice, if you're going to do that activity, is once so we've done it different ways, but I like to do it where you have one person who washes their hands for 5 or 10 seconds, and then one person who washes their hands for 20 seconds after applying the glow germ lotion to their hands. But before you have them washed, I think it's really important to show the people in the audience what it looks like before they're washed. And it's really hard for people to see that glow germ in the back of the room. So I think you should take the time, if you're going to do this activity and make it really worthwhile, I think you need to take the time to walk your volunteers down with that black light shining on the glow germ on their hands, so that everybody can really truly see what it looks like with that glow germ on their hands, see where the white material is, see where the white material really congregates itself, and then do the wash, and then do that same walk down with their hands right next to each other. Here's the 10 seconds, here's the 20 seconds. Look hard. Where do you see that the glow germ didn't come off? And it's typically the same, no matter where we do this exercise, the typical places are the same where that glow germ is stuck. So I think that's really good for people to see up close, because if they don't see it up close and they see it in the back of the room, that activity is pretty much wasted on 75% of the room, unless you really get up close and see it. At this point, that was what I was going to share, and I'm very open to taking questions if you have them.
All right. Thank you so much, Joan. I absolutely love the story about the Band-Aid and the bread. And I think Betsy was messaging me. She's like, that's fantastic. So these are all really great examples to incorporate in trainings that really stick with people once they walk away from the training. So thank you for sharing those. So I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has any questions or comments. So again, feel free to either unmute yourself if you're logged into the Zoom meeting, or if you press *6 on your phone, if you're dialed in only on the phone line, you can unmute them yourself. So I'll go ahead and pause. There's a couple suggestions that are rolling in here while we're awaiting some comments. One is that folks really like the comment, no shame, just retrain. I think that's really great to bring in some of those real life concepts. And then Annalisa was also sharing that sometimes trainers have used a black box to darken the room so that people can actually see the germs from the glow germ as well. Okay, do we have any questions or comments?
Gretchen, I do see a question that came up, if it's okay to just address that one. Annalisa had written, just what do you think are the biggest challenges that farmers face regarding employee training, and what can we share with growers to help them overcome those challenges? I think one of the biggest challenges, and so I'll say from my background, so I have a teaching license, and that does really make worker training way easier for me, and also my husband has a teaching license. So I think along those lines, like we're really comfortable training, but I think for some people who aren't, and maybe managing employees isn't their strong suit, that can be a challenge. So, you know, how can we help? If that's your particular challenge, how do you overcome that? I think maybe actually like, maybe you need to hire that out. Like maybe training actually maybe needs to be hired out if that really truly is a big challenge for you. Or like you can work with a partner to really make sure that the trainings are hitting those things home. There's also some nice resources, like here in Minnesota, MISA had put together a worker training checklist. So there are some checklists out there that can help people really kind of put a nice training together that's really hitting all the things that they need to make sure that they're hitting. Beyond that challenge, I think one of the biggest ones is really time. I know you can just feel like, actually we added a week of employment onto our season at the beginning of the season just to make sure we were spending enough time on training. So before we always used to say, hey, we want employees to start on May 1st. Well, it turns out May 1st is crazy busy. And it's really hard to sit down on May 1st and go over this training for our employees. So for us, our answer to that was starting a couple days earlier just to make sure we had that time in doing employee training. And then also not feeling like you have to do all the training at once, but really do like the relevant training when it comes up. And then I think most farmers recognize their really busy seasons when training is just not realistic. And then they recognize the times when they have more downtime. And those are the times to really plug in and actually schedule your trainings to make sure that they happen. And I think just re-emphasizing that idea, and I mentioned it once, but I feel like any day of training that you put in really well at the beginning of the season will make up for like 7 days of poor or slow work later on in the season. Because if you do the training up front, do it early, do it well, you're going to save yourself time, and resultingly money too in the amount of hours that people are spending on things later on in the season. So I hope that answers your question, Annalisa.
Yeah, those were great examples, and I absolutely love, highlighting the fact that you can reduce a lot of problems down the line if you just spend a day or an hour here up front. I know it's hard to get over that investment, especially when you're going right into the busy season, but yeah, it can reduce a lot of issues. Okay, any other questions or comments that anybody wants to add here? Okay, well, with that, I recognize that we're a couple minutes over time. I wanted to, again, thank you, Joan and Darrell, who I'm not sure is still on the line or not. Thank you so much for your time today. We know that you are very busy people, even in the off season, but we appreciate your perspectives, and I think there was a lot of good discussion. So we'll make sure that we include your contact information, if that's all right with you, Joan, in our meeting notes in case anyone wants to reach out to you directly for some of these tips. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be part of it.
Okay. And as usual, we have recorded this meeting, so I will close down the meeting and then we'll get up this recording as soon as possible onto our website, which if you go, I'm going to skip one slide ahead here just to show you. If you go to our resources tab, there'll be a drop down and it says Produce Safety Educators calls. That's where all of our information will be cataloged. So the meeting recording, the meeting notes, and the actual presentation slides from today. So feel free to visit that on our website in the next day or so. We'll have those up. You also should have gotten a meeting notice from me on Friday if you're signed up for our listserv for this group. Our next meeting is going to be held on Tuesday. So this is a departure from our normal Monday meetings. It's going to be on Tuesday, March 26th from 3 to 4:30 p.m. So we've extended it a little bit longer than our normal hour meeting time because we're going to be talking more about the produce safety rule draft guidance. So we sent out that meeting info this past Friday. It's also available on our website. And again, I'll include that in the meeting notes so that you have the Zoom meeting info. No registrations necessary. You're welcome to join if you'd like and pass that link on to others who might be interested in joining. And as always, if you have future topics that you'd like to discuss or presenters that you would think are great topic presenters like the ones that we had today, we'd be more than happy to invite them to join this particular call. So feel free to email me with that. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for being on the call today and for the great questions and discussions. And we'll hopefully be talking to you and seeing you on March 26th for our next call. So thanks everybody and hope you have a great week.